Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So before I even get to this video, I really want to preface it by saying that no, I don't think therapy is a bad thing. I actually think that therapy is a great thing. I mean, I went to school to become a therapist because I always wanted to be a therapist, and so I'm not here to tell you that therapy is a waste of time or is a waste of money or it's not going to help you. Nothing of a sort. So just when you get into this video, just keep that in mind so that you don't feel any type of way that I might be telling you that your goals of going to therapy are not worth it, because that is not at all what I'm saying. Okay, so with that kind of being out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So I know obviously therapy, the whole subject of therapy is a very, very sensitive subject. So I just ask that you watch the entire video before you kind of let what I'm saying affect the way that you might view therapy, because I know therapy is so fragile and it's so easy to kind of ruin it for people, and that's really not what I'm trying to do. So let's talk about why things are still not working out or changing in your life even when you've been in therapy for the past ever, okay? So we all know people who go to therapy, right? Either you are somebody who goes to therapy or you know people that go to therapy. And there are, in my experiences, like two types of people who are in therapy, right? So you have the first type of person who has some serious big traumas and they need to work through them. Great, right? Then we've got the second person who goes to therapy, and this person is really the person that I'm talking about in this video. So if you are the first one, please take all the time you need in therapy and take that time to heal. I'm not saying anything about that. I understand there are a lot of situations in life that are just so devastating, and there's not going to be a set amount of time that it's going to take you to get over said traumatic incident. So that's not really what I'm focusing on. It's kind of more so the second person that I'm focusing on in this video, and that is the person who goes to therapy kind of more so for the aesthetic of going to therapy. And yes, there is kind of an aesthetic to going to therapy. So this person goes to therapy because this person also for some reason believes that having close friendships with people is always going to result in trauma bonding, and everything negative that's not just sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns is trauma bonding, and they just need to protect their peace. So that's the person I'm really kind of like looking at, and I'm like, this is why your life is not actually getting better even when you've been in therapy for the past 5 years. And the reason why I say it's like an aesthetic, right, is because I think that going to therapy or mental illness or just mental unwellness in general has become, very normalized and very glorified. And because it's very glorified, people almost think like, oh, like I have to be somebody that has some sort of issue, right? And I'm not taking anything away from people that actually really do have any sort of mental illness or just serious depression. Sorry. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these people. They struggle to build healthy relationships because they're going to therapy to say that they go to therapy because they don't know how to have heavy, uncomfortable conversations with their friends without saying that it's trauma bonding. They don't want to hear their friends say anything negative because now it's disrupting their peace. So they go to therapy. Therapy has become just a venting session, essentially, for these people, and everything that gets discussed in therapy just goes in one ear and right out the other, just flies right over their head, right? So have you met somebody that was in therapy and they were in therapy for like years on end, and no matter how long they spent in therapy, none of their behaviors would change? They would say like, oh, I'm working on it in therapy all the time, because therapy is now your entire personality, and that kind of exempts you from making horrible decisions that most people would not agree with because I'm in therapy. Like, they use therapy as more like a shield, and that is, I really have serious beef with this because I have been victimized by people like that and them using therapy or their past issues to not actually take accountability and try to do better in life. And it's so funny because things have done such a 360. Like, back then therapy was something that people seriously clowned on, and that's a terrible thing. People used to make fun of people for needing therapy, and now those very same people, because once again, they don't know how to actually have healthy, heavy conversations without just thinking that it's going to destroy their life, they go to therapy. And what they don't realize is therapy is not supposed to be a lifelong thing, right? So as somebody who went to school because I wanted to be a therapist, this is what happens when you step foot in a therapist's office. So the second that you meet the therapist, the goal of the therapist that gets put in their mind is, okay, how do I, as the therapist, help guide this person to building themselves up, to feeling confident in themselves, to be able to make their own decisions and not feel like they need me anymore. If you are seeing a good therapist, that is the goal. Just like how a parent's goal is to kind of get you ready to leave the nest when you're an adult, they're supposed to teach you decision-making skills, how to be safe, and, you know, all that good stuff. Basically, a therapist is kind of assuming a similar role to your parents. They're trying to help you get to a point where you no longer need them. So you should not be with a therapist for your entire life continuously. That is not the goal of therapy. If that is the track that you see yourself on, maybe, just maybe, you are not seeing the right therapist, or maybe you yourself are not actually taking what is going on in your therapist's office and applying those things to your real life and helping yourself make healthier and better decisions in your life. Obviously, the second one is a really hard realization for a lot of people to come to, and a realization that a lot of people will not want to admit, even if subconsciously, really deep down, they know that that is what it is. So I'm going to give you just 2 examples in my real life of dealing with people who are like that, right? So I had this friend, and this friend would hang out with me and my other best friend. So my best friend and I are very similar. Like, we're kind of very much into, like, you know, beautifying ourselves, really into beauty, things like that, okay? So my friend started to feel, this friend was more of her friend. I kind of was just there every now and again, but I still saw these behaviors and I was just like, this is driving me crazy. But they felt like they had this inferiority complex when they were around us, because they were like, so you guys must think that you guys are better than everybody else, and you guys must be looking around at everybody and thinking about how unattractive people are, which is insane. And they would tell us every single time that they were with us that they felt like they became bitchier. Crazy. And they would sit there during our hangouts and nitpick at least 1 to 2 people, at least, every single time we hung out, and make fun of the way they look. And me and my best friend were really, really confused by that. We were just really taken aback by that. And when we kind of would be like, oh, I didn't even notice like that person looked like that or was doing that, didn't even pay attention, because me and her like literally have like 0 like spatial awareness to the point where it could be a bad thing. But like our friend, he had such a high awareness to everything going on around him, and it felt like tearing them down was making himself feel better, and he was projecting that trait onto us because he felt like we must have thought that we were too good for him. So he kind of started to bash them to sort of fit in with us, even though that is never something we even did. And so when we kind of finally had enough of that, we would call him out. And what did he say? I know it's really bad. It's something that I'm working on with my therapist. Spoiler alert, it was never something that really ever changed. And, you know, needless to say, we did not stay friends with that person because that turned into like it was a whole thing. But that's just the one thing that I wanted to focus on with that friend. But there were so many things that this friend of ours did, and he had these insecurities that he just was not actually actively implementing strategies and techniques to overcome those things outside of therapy, other than talking about the fact that he was in therapy. My next story is about another friend that I had. She had a very traumatic life, which is very understandable, but it got to a point where she was constantly picking fights with me and using those things, those traumatic things, as like her her excuse to pick those fights. And at one point, and this is why I say too, right? There are certain things that we as people who are not therapists are not equipped to hear. So I'm not telling you like you have to hear every single traumatic thing that your friend has went through 100 million times if it's actually really, really impacting you. There is a point in time where you are allowed to say, hey, this is kind of like not my expertise. Like, I don't think that I can actually help you through these things. Maybe you should see a professional so that you can actually get the help you need, right? So that's what I tried to do in this instance. She was constantly using her traumatic things in her life that happened as a way to pick a fight with me, as a way to just kind of get leeway for doing those things. And when I told her, hey, I think you should see a therapist, when her response was, I've been in therapy, thank you very much, I didn't even know what to think of that. I literally stared at that for a second and I was just like, well, you could have fooled me. Like, I would never have guessed that you were in therapy, because you are not acting like somebody who is actively recognizing your flaws, and you're not using your time in therapy, and you're not actually implementing any healthy coping mechanisms in your everyday life. You're still picking fights, you're still using it as ammo to be a problematic person and a bad friend. So that was kind of where my issue was, and I really started to realize a lot of people were just in therapy kind of like for shits and giggles, or just to say like, I'm in therapy, like I need help, I'm so broken, because being very broken is very romanticized in today's society, unfortunately, because it's not romantic, it's not something that you should be excited to be broken. And you as a person, it is not your job to deal with people who are constantly using their brokenness to not be a healthy person in your life, whether it is just a friend or a romantic partner. I understand, like, as friends, we should be able to open up and talk about really hard things in our life. I think that's a beautiful thing. That's literally the whole point of friendship, and that has unfortunately changed, and that's why I think there's such an influx of people that go to therapy, because people around them don't have enough empathy these days, and nobody actually wants to listen to you talk about your problems. But at the same time, it does get to a point where it can get very exhausting. Have you ever had a friend where they just chronically made the worst decisions ever in their life, and you would sit there and you yourself would dedicate so much time to giving them advice or whatever, or your 2 cents, and you something really well thought out, and then they're like eating that shit up. They're like, yep, I agree with you, yeah, and you really think they're getting the message, and then like the next day they're like, oh, by the way, I need some advice on how to fix this thing that I did because I didn't take any of the advice that you gave me yesterday. How frustrating is that? Is that somebody that you really want to dedicate your time to? Is that somebody who deserves your time? Because they don't respect your time. If they're okay with sitting there and letting you talk and ramble for hours and hours, giving them well thought out advice, and they're just going to take it and stomp all over it, do you really want to keep wasting your time and speaking to that person? Is that a conversation you want to even entertain? But they don't really feel any type of way about doing it when it comes to therapy, because they don't have an outside relationship with their therapist. And, you know, as their friends, we don't know what's going on in the therapist's office. So, like, sometimes it feels kind of hard to hold your friends accountable. But all that to say, there are people out there who are just allergic to taking accountability. And those types of people will be in therapy for an excessively long time and just not actually get it through their heads that they're only taking the first step to solving the problem. Therapy is second. The first step to knowing that you have a problem is admitting you have a problem. Therapy is the second thing. It's actually going out and seeking that professional help. But that professional help, therapy, all that time that you spend in that therapist's office is going to fall flat if you yourself are not willing to do the ugly work yourself. And if you are that person, that is okay, so long as now you're aware of it and you're like, you know what? I am that person. I do go to therapy all the time. I'm always talking about like self-love and growth and healing and stuff like that, but I'm not actually treating people in my life better. I'm not actually trying to stop doing those really negative things that I did because I was affected by something that happened in my past. Therapy is supposed to be very ugly, right? And so is outside of therapy, because we're never done healing, right? We go into therapy, we're working with a professional to help us come up with coping mechanisms that are going to be a lot healthier for us in our everyday life, but it doesn't stop there, because when you leave that therapist's office, what use is it? You're just throwing your money away if you don't actually try to make your life better. So if that is you, if you can admit that to yourself, you're already well on your way to being able to not be that person anymore. If you can catch yourself before you are stuck in a moment where you feel yourself going back into old bad habits, and you can kind of try to have an internal dialogue with yourself and think like, hey, this is the reason why I even started going to therapy, because I've got these really bad things that I do and I really want to make a conscious effort to stop doing them. Some people don't actually have a conscious effort of wanting to stop doing those things, and that's kind of when you're just like stuck in limbo. You're in and out of therapy. Therapy is supposed to be something that you do throughout your life in increments. You're never supposed to be with the same therapist for 10 years, right? Like, you go, you try to learn how to stand up on your own 2 feet, then you leave and you live your life and you remember what you did in therapy, and you try your best to apply those things in your real life, and then you can get to a point where you're like, hey, life is really hard again. I don't actually feel like I have anybody to talk to. I'm going to go back to therapy. That's the cycle that therapy is supposed to be. It's not supposed to just be like, oh, you're just always in therapy. I find people like that to be very exhausting, because those really are the people who are not actually making conscious efforts to change anything about themselves. The thing is, life is so hard and stressful for everybody. Whether you have something severe like a mental illness or not, it's hard and stressful for everybody. Almost everybody is depressed now because life is so freaking hard. Don't use that as an excuse to be a shitty person. Please don't. And if you are going to go to therapy, please actually use those resources well, because you have an advantage over what we did back then, because it was not okay. It was not socially acceptable, especially in a lot of cultures. In my culture, it was definitely not socially acceptable to see a therapist. When I was really depressed in high school, my parents didn't even allow me to see a therapist. So I never even got that chance when I was in high school, and that was the time I really needed it. So just be aware of how you're using those resources, and don't take it for granted, and actually try to contribute and be a positive influence in other people's lives. So yeah, that's pretty much my therapy talk session. I would love to hear from people who either do go to therapy or are therapists. I think like we all could have a really interesting perspective on that. But yeah, until next time, guys, please take care of yourself and take care of everybody else around you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.